You later got asked to be the head of USAID.
I got that job when I was 36 years old.
36 years old, you're running USAID. How many employees does it have?
We had 11,000.
And did you feel qualified to run something that big?
I did until, the work started.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Top names in climate finance are on Bloomberg.
I can't tell whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about climate finance.
A lot of great stuff is happening, but is it enough? No, it's not enough.
I'm biased. I'm a huge investor in both fission and fusion, and hoping that it comes in time.
Transition is not going to be an event. It's a process.
But at the end of the day, it's the right thing for the planet, it's the right thing for the industry, and there is business opportunity.
Or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges.
Britain's next.
It was going to keep rain World Cup. This is a 3.
As the economic picture.
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield at its new time Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from New Hampshire.
From Bloomberg's New Hampshire studio to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Polls begin closing in the Granite State in just about 2 hours. Record turnout being predicted by officials here as the race is now down to former President Trump and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley.
Trump has been expanding his lead on Nikki Haley here, up now 22 points in the Daily Boston Globe Suffolk University poll.
Despite that, Haley is keeping her optimism.
We were excited to get the endorsement of the conservative union leader. It's amazing to get the first 6 votes in the country in Dixon Notch. We're very grateful for that.
And so we wait here live from Manchester, New Hampshire. Kaylee, big questions about turnout.
Yes.
With some very aggressive forecasts being made, and big questions as well about whether this Republican primary race is going to go further than New Hampshire.
Yes, there are 2 candidates left in the game, at least on the Republican side for now. The question is, will there still be 2 candidates come tomorrow morning?
That's right.
A lot of that may depend actually on turnout, because Nikki Haley would need a big show here of undeclared independent voters that could break for her if she actually hopes to catch Donald Trump in the Granite State. Of course, you spoke with the Secretary of State here, David Scanlon, who said 322,000 is how many voters he thought would show up to the polls today.
Yeah, which just doesn't ring true to a lot of people in what have been a pretty sleepy primary, to be perfectly honest, without the fanfare that we're used to. The question is, will voters be at the polls? They're voting right now, Kaylee. 7 p.m., the first round of closings. 8 p.m. we'll actually have the opportunity to start counting votes here. And we spent some time earlier today talking with a former presidential contender on behalf of Donald Trump. That's Vivek Ramaswamy speaking with us here, now a surrogate for the Trump campaign in New Hampshire.
The Iowa voter base was crystal clear, and it's why I made the decision that I did. I wasn't expecting to drop out that night, but I think the most important decisions I actually make with gut instinct rather than micro-analyzing the data. The voice of the people was clear in that case. And that they want an America First candidate. I think there were 2 America First candidates in this race. That's Donald Trump and myself. I got about 8% of the vote there. I was about to get 8% in New Hampshire. And I felt it was important to send that vote Donald Trump's direction to deliver a decisive margin of victory here, because I think it is time for this GOP primary to end. I do think when we think about who's the right leader to, as I believe needs to be done, shut down the administrative state, revive our economy, actually seal our border, actually revive even our national identity in this country, I think that is Donald Trump. The people spoke loud and clear. It's time for this primary to end, and I think for all intents and purposes, that's going to happen by the end of this night, whether or not the other candidate acknowledges it.
You said in the first debate that Donald Trump was the best president of your lifetime.
I specifically said of the 21st century, although I think that there's a good case to be made. It's for my lifetime. Absolutely.
So, of course, you would endorse him. Why would you run against him?
Well, look, the case I made in the entire campaign is that we do need to reach the next generation. And I was able to reach the next generation in a way that nobody in our party's history really has. We had 40% of our donors to my campaign were first-time ever donors to the GOP, galvanizing young people that I think the GOP has wrongly, if I may say so, written off. It's not that young people on college campuses or elsewhere are necessarily against what the GOP stands for. It's that they are hungry for a party that stands for something. What does it mean to be a Republican? It's not just being against the Biden Democrat agenda. It's about standing for the ideals of the American Revolution. Meritocracy, free speech, open debate, self-governance. The idea that we, the people, create a government that's accountable to us, not the other way around. These are basic foundational ideals that I think even many libertarians, important in a state like New Hampshire, many independents, including young people, I think did gravitate to over the course of my campaign, and I think will gravitate to in the course of Donald Trump's campaign for the general election.
They're still going to have an 80-year-old to vote for, though.
Well, I don't think it's just about what the actual age of the person is. Even in this primary, Nikki Haley is younger in age than Donald Trump, but represents an older, outdated vision of the Republican Party, fighting foreign wars that don't advance the American interest. A surveillance state here at home that would make Dick Cheney proud. That's an old, outdated vision of the Republican Party. So it's less about specifically the age of the candidate, but more the age of the ideas and the vision. And one thing that I have been encouraged about, I've spent some time with Donald Trump this week, including in multiple stops on the campaign trail and the events that have been held at night. I've been really encouraged, like in a deep and personal way, by hearing him talk more about the importance of free speech in America. How that's actually vital. It is. It's in the First Amendment for a reason. But at a moment where the Democrats and Joe Biden have abandoned the free speech agenda in the United States, this is a wide open opportunity for the Republican Party to seize this as our identity. I did that over the course of my race, and I'm really heartened by seeing Donald Trump. Increasingly, you're seeing him mention that more in the campaign trail, coming out against central bank digital currency, something that I think that many libertarians here in New Hampshire also care about. I think this expands the scope of our movement. I think it's going to be major in delivering success this November.
I do want to get back to the CBDC point, but just on the idea, you've had a lot of conversations with Donald Trump over the course of this week. I'm wondering how many of them included what role you could have in a future administration. What job would you want?
To tell you the truth, none of our conversations included that, because what I've said...
Okay, so what job would you want, even if you haven't talked about it yet?
Well, I'll tell you this isn't about me. I mean, really, my whole purpose was actually asking myself a year and a half ago, how was I going to make maximal difference for this country, having lived the American dream? I'm not a politician. I'm an entrepreneur. I've founded multi-billion-dollar companies. My wife is a surgeon who has similarly lived the American dream. The question for us was, how would we make a maximal impact on this country? And the decision we made was for me to be the next president. Now, that choice belongs to the people and not to us. And so the people have made clear that that's going to be Donald Trump. But one of the things I wanted to accomplish most in my presidency, if I were elected, was to shut down that fourth branch of government. Shut down those agencies. Really lay off 75% of the federal bureaucrat headcount and actually restore 3 branches of government rather than 4. I think Donald Trump is the best candidate who's actually going to be able to achieve that amongst the field here, and I will help him achieve that in whatever way is best for the country.
Our conversation with former Republican presidential contender Vivek Ramaswamy with us here earlier today in New Hampshire as we bring in our Bloomberg Reporters Roundtable. With us now in Manchester is Bloomberg's Mario Parker and Wendy Benjaminson. Great to have you both here. Happy primary day. We've got a lot to learn still tonight. Wendy, your thoughts on the closing pitch here for the Trump campaign from Vivek Ramaswamy?
It's a really interesting one. He's also obviously pitching himself a little forward as a possible cabinet member because he reached the generation that he fears Trump isn't reaching. Yeah. But it is, it is sort of saying a lot of the things that Donald Trump tries to say and sometimes gets wrapped up in his grievances and sort of doesn't get to. But the idea that, well, as Vivek Ramaswamy puts it, that, this idea of cancel culture and woke capitalism, as he's written about, is what I think he's referring to when he talks about the need for free speech.
Okay.
But I'm guessing as well as anyone else.
Sure.
But it's an interesting surrogate pitch for the last few moments of the campaign.
Well, what I wonder how much the last few moments, even the last few days, Mario, have ultimately mattered when you had Trump decisively win in Iowa. You had every other contender that wasn't Nikki Haley dropping out and now endorsing him in the case of not just Vivek, but Ron DeSantis as well. And typically when you've seen upsets in New Hampshire, polling suggests that the candidate that upsets is getting more and more support leading up to it. It's going the opposite direction for Nikki Haley. So if anyone's closing argument's working, maybe it's just not hers.
Yeah, well, what we've heard from some of the folks that we've hosted, even here in this space, is the fact that undecided voters, that 40% of the electorate here in New Hampshire, they need something to stir that angst, right, to drive them to the polls to vote against Donald Trump. That's Nikki Haley's, that's the predicate for her campaign here in New Hampshire. And from what we've seen so far on the ground here, she hasn't quite done that. You've seen in the last 48 hours or so that she's ratcheted up her attacks. She's started to attack Donald Trump along the lines of mental acuity. But one has to wonder if that's too little too late.
Yeah. We've been trying to paint the picture for everyone of what's really going on here in Manchester, the different kind of feel that there is in the air. This time's been very quiet. You might say a low energy primary without the normal fanfare, but happening here, and we're set up in a hotel on Elm Street that's kind of the central location for media activity. And right around lunchtime today, every surrogate for Donald Trump showed up at the same time in this hotel.
It was amazing.
And conducted a flurry of interviews. That includes Senator Tim Scott, his own son, Eric Trump, others, including Vivek Ramaswamy, who we spoke with earlier. Where are all of Nikki Haley's surrogates?
Perhaps they're at another hotel.
This is part of the story, isn't it?
It is part of the story, although I will say that while that reflects a very organized effort on the part of Donald Trump, Trump's campaign, we have talked to dozens of voters today at different polling places all across the state, and I am seeing quite a bit of enthusiasm for Nikki Haley. There's a lot of Democrats and independents who say they're crossing over. There are a number of Republicans who say, you know, I liked him in 2016, I got tired of him in 2020, and I don't want to see him in 2024. Yeah. But it's just whether or not that's enough. But the Haley voters do seem more enthusiastic here than they did in Iowa, where it was a very Trump-friendly state, and Nikki Haley's been working the voters here very, very hard. And I think those who show up to vote for her, whether it's to stop Trump or to put her in the nomination, are excited about it.
Well, one of the things Nikki Haley has been pitching herself on is her foreign policy experience, given that she was the former ambassador to the United Nations, and given all that's happening in the world. I mean, Mario, a headline just crossing the Bloomberg terminal, the U.S. and allies conducted now an 8th strike on Houthi targets in Yemen, designed to degrade, according to our reporting, Houthi capabilities. The thing is, all of that might be true. There might be a hot conflict in the Middle East, hot conflict in Europe with Ukraine and Russia. But is foreign policy what matters to voters in New Hampshire, to voters anywhere, frankly, in the country right now?
Foreign policy does matter, right? Because Nikki Haley, her ascent, really, there's a correlation between her ascent and some of the global conflicts that continue to deepen, right, last fall. Now, how foreign policy matters is the fact that the subtext of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again is the world is a scary place. These are all the things that are happening out here, and I'm the one that can solve it. And so that's what you're seeing from some of these voters, that when you speak to them, they have this sepia view of Donald Trump, this nostalgia, where they feel as though we weren't ensnared in so many foreign conflicts.
All right, Mario Parker and Wendy Benjaminson, our wonderful reporters here at Bloomberg. Thank you both so much for joining us here in Manchester. We appreciate it. Now, coming up, we'll have more coverage of the New Hampshire primary live from here in Manchester. Stick with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
So let's go inside the boardroom. Let's suppose you win a proxy fight and/or you just get invited onto the board. You go to your first board meeting, and you're the person who's saying you can fix this company, and all of the others on the board of directors are saying, well, we're doing pretty well. How do you get received when you start saying, here's what I wanted you to do?
Well, first of all, we don't bring that to the boardroom. Our time is spent with the CEO, the chairman, the CFO, and share our plans with them outside the boardroom. We try never to solve an issue in a boardroom. Okay, it's always best done the day before, the week before, outside that room. We wouldn't be there if they really were doing well. So it's really hard for them to straight face and tell us we're doing well. And we present them with a plan.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
I anticipate that this will be a healthy 50% plus win tonight, and then from there, you know, obviously eyes are already on South Carolina and then Nevada ahead, and that's all Trump country. So I'm expecting 50 plus, and from there, it's all about unifying the party and moving ahead towards the general election.
Trump surrogate and Florida Congresswoman Kat Cammack speaking with us earlier today in New Hampshire. And now joining us here in Manchester is Republican strategist Jennifer Horn. She actually used to chair the New Hampshire Republican Party and is now a registered independent.
I am.
And probably the former president, who she just said could get 50% plus of votes here, has a little something to do with that. Jennifer, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you agree with her that despite how you may feel about him, despite how maybe half of Republican or independent voters feel about him, he could pull that off here in New Hampshire this evening?
Well, I wish we had a full half of Republicans who felt that way about him. We wouldn't be where we are now. But I think that expecting an outcome that's in excess of 50% for Donald Trump is really reasonable. It's probably right where we're going to land. Turnout is going to be enormous today. There are some of the Republican strongholds in our state whose turnout has already exceeded what was expected for the entire day. And an argument can be made for either candidate on who that benefits, but I think in the end that's really benefits Donald Trump.
That has been the conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
But also in terms of the geography that you just mentioned and those Boston suburbs, if you will, that are just north of the New Hampshire border, is that Trump country? We're talking about college-educated, more affluent voters. Yeah. That could go either way.
This is the only thing that has caused me to second guess myself in the last several days. However, I think it's still going to go for Trump, even though we see these other types of breakdowns across the board. The party's with Trump. Like, it's something that's just hard to wrap your head around, but the party is with Trump. And in order for Nikki Haley to really have made a difference and gotten in there, she would have had to make up about 17 points in the last 3 or 4 days. And that's really, really hard to do. That is a big number to overcome. I think that we're going to see Trump over 50%. I think Haley could end up, under 40. And we'll sort of see how that turns out. But with these kinds of turnout numbers, it usually benefits enthusiasm over any kind of practical thinking.
You say the party is with Trump, and even those who are outwardly with Nikki Haley ultimately may say they're going to be with Trump at the end of the game anyway, if he's the nominee, including the governor here, Chris Sununu. Absolutely. We spoke with him a few days ago about this. Just take a listen, if you will, to some of what he told us.
He doesn't believe in limited government. He believes in this kind of dictatorship. He doesn't believe in local control. He believes in Washington. So those are not Republican values.
But you have said because if he were to be the Republican nominee and because you are a Republican, you would support him.
Yeah, I think most people would. That shouldn't surprise anybody, yeah.
Even though you don't think he actually carries the values of the Republican Party?
Well, look, Joe Biden, that's how bad Joe Biden is.
Does that not, in your mind, Jennifer, speak to the idea of inevitability of Trump being the nominee anyway? Even if he's out stumping for Haley, he's been all over the media. He has been a very active surrogate, not just someone who gave her an endorsement. But did he really help her?
Not when he says those things, but it's not just Chris Sununu. It's Senator Rubio and, Congresswoman Mace, and, kind of go through your list. Tim Scott, just a day or two ago, he's here stumping for the president. The party has lined up behind Donald Trump, and the base lined up behind Donald Trump a long time ago. But if you listen to what Governor Sununu, and Chris Sununu is a skilled politician, he's an accomplished politician, but when he says Donald Trump isn't a Republican, he wants a dictatorship. But yeah, I'll vote for him if he's the party nominee. Of course, I'm a Republican. I am a big believer that that's the problem. And it's not just Chris. Like I said, it goes right up and down the party when it comes to elected leaders and the base. But when we sit here and say, no, he's a dictator, but I'll vote for him anyway, it's really hard to convince Republican voters that they shouldn't vote for him as well.
Yeah. So let's just get a gut check here. Yeah. Because you just played out potential numbers that would coincide with the polling that we've seen. Donald Trump hit 60 today in the Suffolk poll for the first time.
Yes.
I know people are still voting, but
you can't overcome 60%. You can't overcome 60%. If Donald Trump wins tonight by a sizable margin, the primary is over and we are in the general election.
The primary is over. So the general election starts tomorrow morning in that world.
I would say the general election starts tonight. It's in that world. And when you talk about 60%, his goal essentially by summer is to get to 70, 75%. If he's already at 60% tonight, then it's hard to see what happens other than that.
Just quickly, Nikki Haley is saying, I'm staying in this for the long haul. It's South Carolina Super Tuesday. That's the messaging from her campaign, pointing out specifically a lot of Super Tuesday states are open or semi-open primaries. We have 30 seconds. If she can't do it in New Hampshire, could she do it in any one of those other states?
No, I don't think so. The rules for so many of the Super Tuesday states have changed this year in this cycle. Winner takes all. I don't know where there's a chance for her to really pick up any significant delegates, but there is an advantage for her to staying in, a small one. If anything happens to Trump, she's the last person standing and she's still there.
Sobering thoughts, but also very helpful to remember when we start reading numbers later on. Great insights from Jennifer Horn. Thank you for being with us, Jennifer. Coming up, the Titans of Wall Street weigh in on the 2024 election. Our Wall Street Vote segment ahead. This week, we'll hear from Blair Efron of Centerview Partners. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Our studios in New York and San Francisco, our expert hosts have the data and analysis about the companies you know and the startups to watch, plus the interviews you don't want to miss. Watch Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow on Bloomberg Technology, the only daily business show dedicated to tech, right in the middle of the trading action. 11 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 a.m. in the West. Only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything. Bloomberg UK, your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us live from Manchester. Wall Street titans are sharing their thoughts on the economics of the upcoming election and what the potential candidates' policies will mean for the investing community. Bloomberg's David Weston spoke with Blair Efron, co-founder and partner of Centerview Partners, for Wall Street Week.
For the first time in history, we have two candidates that have been president, so you have a track record of what to expect. In the case of President Biden, you had so far 3 years of steadiness, good growth, markets at an all-time high. I think it's underappreciated what has gone on with the economy. Unemployment at 3.7%. Versus the Trump years at 4%. Job creation, if you take out COVID as the impact, you still have 9 million jobs created under President Biden versus 6 million under President Trump. And even GDP growth, a few basis points higher under President Biden. So in addition to that, you've had a re-engagement globally. And when you think about our biggest and best companies, 60% of their business is outside the country, outside the U.S. And I think if you look at the policies ahead, what do you expect in a second term? I think with Joe Biden, you still have out of the $3 trillion of investment spend, there is $5 trillion of total spend, but only $3 trillion towards investment, infrastructure, CHIPS Act, IRA. 75% of that is still available to be spent. So you will get that spent. You'll have $900 billion has already been spent by the private sector, capital, in terms of support behind IRA. I also think you will see policies aimed towards lowering costs for all Americans. You saw in the first term, drug pricing, insulin. In the second term, expect more around child care, long-term care benefits, more around drug pricing, and continued engagement globally. So then the question is, with the Trump presidency, what do we know so far?
Well, what about that? Because if you look back, I think a lot of Wall Street says it was not a bad time under President Trump. In fact, we actually had good growth. We had good job creation, less regulation, less taxation. A lot of companies did pretty well, didn't they?
The companies did well, and they continue to do well. And I think that people need to appreciate that our private sector is as innovative and vibrant as ever.
That was Blair Efron, co-founder and partner of Centerview Partners. And for more Wall Street votes, you can catch Wall Street Week every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. But, Joe, when we think about how Wall Street may be thinking about what we're going to witness tonight here in New Hampshire, I would point everyone to the research in my inbox from Terry Haynes, our friend here at Bloomberg of Pangea Policy, who points out that before and immediately after the 2016 election, the vast majority of analysts were completely wrong about what a Trump presidency would actually do to the stock market. So he says if you're trying to game out what Trump means for markets 9 months out, it's a fool's game.
Pretty interesting. When we talk about the economy as well in this particular primary cycle, we found out in Iowa that it was not the economy, stupid. It was immigration that was the number one issue for voters. And here today, Frank Luntz told us that that was no different in New Hampshire. We might be closer to Canada than the southern border. But I'm wondering how those will play out for or against each other here in voting tonight.
Yeah, I guess border security, maybe both north and south,
for sure,
is an issue. We're going to find out in due time. We'll continue with our coverage here of the New Hampshire primary live from Manchester, so stick with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio.
Now, women on average have about a 30% lower, I guess, amount of money saved up for retirement compared to men.
Yes.
So what are you doing about that?
Yeah, so we launched a campaign called Retire Inequality. And we do know that women retire with 30% less. Women make 83 cents on the dollar. And so there's a couple of things that we're doing. One, it's having this conversation and making sure that we all are aware that there is a gap. By the way, women live longer than men, so longevity risk is a real factor. Secondly, it's about making sure that we are talking to women about what can you do differently. And so whether that's negotiating pay and what are some tools that are out there, making sure that you take the time to negotiate, because we know women do not negotiate as much as men, which puts you at a disadvantage to start. But then also along the way, making sure that women are securing their own retirement, and that as part of their retirement plan, we're having much more conversation around guaranteed income as well. And so ensuring that we understand what are the nuances for women. If you think about COVID, 2 million women exited the workforce. They did not continue to contribute to their 401k or 403b plan. And so how do we make sure, as a matter of policy, as a matter of engagement, that women can have an opportunity to catch up, that women can understand that if you exited the workforce and now you're back, that that's 2 years of compounding that you were not able to take advantage of, and how do we continue to make sure that we're educating them and giving them the tools that they need to get back on track.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us live from Manchester, New Hampshire, where polls are set to close in total in about 2.5 hours here. It's a staggered finish in New Hampshire. Let's bring in a prominent New Hampshire politician, Steve Dupree, who served as chair of the Republican Party of New Hampshire, among other positions. It's great to see you here at the table. Thanks for having us in New Hampshire.
Thanks for coming.
I'm hearing a lot of talk about South Carolina. I'm hearing a lot of talk about inevitability. How important is New Hampshire going to be tonight? Because people haven't actually finished voting, and we have not started counting yet.
I think it's very important. Witness the fact that President Trump came here 7 times last year. I think he's been in New Hampshire this year almost that many times. He was at a polling place today. I think obviously he's trying to score a knockout punch and end this process early. If Nikki Haley can win or come close, I think that keeps her alive. If she were to win, obviously the money would be dramatic. If she comes close, probably not quite so much, but certainly she has shown she's the only one left standing. So if you don't want Donald Trump to be the nominee, she's the candidate you have to vote for.
Well, but the polls suggest right now that not enough people will vote for her or want to vote for her. 22 points behind the latest Suffolk University Boston Globe poll, Trump at 60%. We always talk about New Hampshire as the potential for an upset, right? Because historically that has happened. How likely is it to happen this time around?
Well, Dave Scanlon, our Secretary of State, learned from Bill Gardner, who was always great at predicting the turnout. And he predicted a record turnout among the undeclared voters. There are 350,000 of them. If there's a really significant turnout there, you offset that margin in the Republican Party. And we'll see. One of the reasons you should have a state like New Hampshire go first is those undeclared voters represent the widest swath of voters in the country. And it tests your electability in a general election. So it's going to have to be a very large independent turnout. But I think if Haley were to win or come close, there'll be a lot of Republicans who may support the president's policies, but start hearing her message of conservatism without chaos.
What do we say what do we mean when we say come close? Nikki Haley's going to try to spin anything into a moral victory here if she doesn't win it outright. What would impress Steve Dupree?
I think if you're 6 points or less, I think that's saying, wow, that's pretty incredible effort considering you're running against an incumbent. People forget Donald Trump is running almost as an incumbent president. So I think that would put her within striking range. I think that immediately opens up more money, more excitement. Other people who aren't paying attention take a look. But make no mistake about it. I watched the John McCain campaign go from a 17-point victory in 2000 in New Hampshire, and then they met the Darth Vader of politics when they hit South Carolina. It's very tough there, and she's down in the polls. But I think it would fundamentally fundamentally alter the dynamic, at least for a while.
Well, and South Carolina is her home state, which may make it all the more important to her as an individual and as a candidate. If we could just talk, though, about the New Hampshire process. You mentioned that Donald Trump came here, 7 times last year, maybe an equivalent now.
Yeah.
Isn't New Hampshire supposed to be about, you barnstorm, you go to every diner, you sit in the living rooms, you talk to these voters, you get up close and personal? He's doing big rallies.
Right.
A handful of them. Has he broken what the New Hampshire primary process is, what it's supposed to be for you?
No, I think he's unique. I think if Arnold Schwarzenegger were running for president because he was a movie star, he'd get that same kind of crowd. I think Donald Trump made a very smart decision in 2016. He was a celebrity. People love seeing celebrities. I worked for Pete McCloskey in 1972. He had crowds of 20. When Paul Newman came with him, they went to 1,000. I used to tell McCloskey it was for him. That wasn't true, but the star power made the difference. Donald Trump was smart to leverage it. I think he's a unique candidate. I think Nikki Haley's done it the right way. There is some nationalization of this, though, because of social media, but I think the way you earn it, if you're Nikki Haley, you have to do it the way she's done it. 5-7 stops yesterday at restaurants, making the pitch.
Yeah. Let's hear from Nikki Haley, speaking in front of supporters in New Hampshire, taking aim at the former president earlier today.
We should want to win the majority of Americans. But the only way we're going to do that is if we elect a new generational conservative leader. I voted for Donald Trump twice. I was proud to serve America in his administration. But rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him.
We've heard a lot about chaos, and of course, we've heard a lot about age in this race. How much of an issue is the 80-year-old versus the 80-year-old to, frankly, an aging population here in New Hampshire?
It is an aging population, but I think that you're seeing a lot of people would like to turn the page and go to the Nikki Haley, Chris Sununu generation of younger Republicans. I remember in Ronald Reagan, when he skipped the first debate in Iowa in 1979, people said he was too old, and he was 69 years old. He'd be a youngster in this race today. So I think people, notwithstanding the fact we have an aging demographic, I think even older citizens say it's time to turn the page.
Maybe they know best.
I was at a Nikki Haley event a few days ago, and someone in the audience said, you know, there's a lot of senior citizens here. And she said, I'm not being disrespectful when I say that, but it was just interesting. And of course, this also, from a policy perspective, comes up when it's the Social Security question and the retirement age, something Joe had discussed with Nikki Haley several months ago. It's made the rounds in advertisements that have been running in this market from the Trump campaign and those supporting him. Did she do enough on the policy front for voters here? Because his ads have been specific and targeted, and mostly she talks about a new generation of leaders. It's kind of this vague idea.
Yeah. I think, you know, everybody runs a perfect campaign the morning after the election's over. I think she would have been smarter, in my opinion, to put more beef on those policy points early on. And frankly, I think she should have been on the offense against President Trump tactically early on. Now the battle's joined, it's a little easier, but it's a fine line because Nikki Haley wants some people who voted for Donald Trump in the past to come her way. As Chris Christie found out, you don't get very far when you spend your whole time insulting the people indirectly who voted for Donald Trump. So she had to walk a fine line. I think perhaps a little too cautious. Of course, I'm a McCain acolyte, so I think you should have the press around you all the time, which is considered anathema. You're going to make mistakes, and in the day of social media, you're going to make them. As she showed, though, with the slavery question, if you recover quickly enough, you get a pass. So I would have, you know, thrown the long ball a little bit more, but that's probably why nobody wants me advising their campaigns anymore.
I remember when the media was considered John McCain's base at one point.
There was a certain amount of truth to that,
well,
by the way.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
President Trump took a question from a reporter about Nikki Haley earlier today in New Hampshire. Let's listen.
Mr. President, Haley says that she's staying in through Super Tuesday.
I don't care.
Is she a threat to you?
No, and I don't care if she stays in. Let her do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter.
I don't care. Tell her to do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter, he said. Will he be feeling differently by the end of the night?
Depends on the results. Like I say, he has a chance to have a knockout punch here today. If it's close or she wins, she continues the fight on. It's a daunting road. The other thing that happens in both parties, like it's done with President Biden, the rules change. The Republican National Committee is Donald Trump's committee. He is the incumbent. So the rules have changed. There are more primaries on Super Tuesday. I remember when Super Tuesday used to be 5 or 6 6 states. Now it's 12. More of the states are winner take all. And hats off. I mean, just politically, Donald Trump and his team have put together one of the most organized, well-run primary campaigns I've seen in 30 or 40 years. They're very disciplined. They know what they're doing, and they've done a very good job executing on their game plan and keeping him to the script.
Final question for you. You live here in New Hampshire, where Chris Sununu is governor. He's been elected and re-elected multiple times. He has given Haley his full-throated backing, not just endorsed her. He spoke with Joe and I earlier this week. He has made the rounds on media. He has done this in a way that you could maybe say Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, didn't necessarily do for Ron DeSantis, even though she did endorse him. DeSantis didn't win. He's now out of the race. What happens for Chris Sununu and his legacy as a politician in New Hampshire if Haley does not win or come close tonight?
I don't think it hurts him. In fact, I think it helps him. Here's why. There are so many of these politicians you've seen now jumping on the endorsement bandwagon. The average American goes, that's not political courage, that's cowardice. Chris Sununu, when he supports you, like when I ran for re-election as a committee man and wasn't going to win, he puts everything into it. I think people respect that. They go, you win or you lose, you actually do what you say you're going to do and you commit to it. So I think he comes out of this with even greater stature. He's already said that if Donald Trump's the nominee, he's going to vote for him. He's the kind of Republican we need more of instead of these fair weather friends that seem to populate all of Congress, by the way, in both parties.
Well, we do appreciate your insights and giving us a sneak inside the psyche at the Snowshoe Club.
Well, thanks. Come back again for you.
Have a great primary night. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
We thank you for being with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, we're just hours away now from polls actually closing here and New Hampshire's primary coming to an end. Our closers are coming up next with a look at the crucial showdown between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are on the way on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
CFOs are reshaping the C-suite. Bloomberg's chief future officer shines a spotlight on these dynamic leaders.
Today's CFO has to be much, much more than a bookkeeper.
One of the most important things is looking around the corner.
We have to let go of the traditional legacy department store.
Their impact goes far beyond the balance sheet. And on Chief Future Officer, they focus on much more than just revenues and margins.
You also have to be credible business leaders in order to really impact the business and steer the direction.
We are like biologists. We need to deeply understand the financial DNA of a company.
People just come with a playbook and say, okay, we're going to roll that. Don't do that. Think longer term.
It's an amazing time to be in this role. It's a lot more than the profit today. It's building the future of tomorrow.
Get passion, perspective, and more from the Chief Future Officers of some of the world's most influential companies. A new episode every month, only on Bloomberg. In a multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's a lot of ground to cover.
We indeed have a rally.
We're talking a lot of dividends. We're talking income.
We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, Monday on Bloomberg.
Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Former President Trump was asked by a reporter earlier how voters who voted for him in 2020 that don't want to vote for him again will ultimately decide. Here he is.
Oh, they'll all vote for me.
How do you bring them back into the town?
They're going to all vote for me again. They're going to all vote for me again, everybody. And I'm not sure we need too many.
We're about to find out together. Joining us, our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Great to see you both. Primary day. We've had a couple hours go by since we last had a chance to pick your brain. Turnout, certainly talking to Steve Dupree, seems to be the story of the hour here. Rick, that's what you want to know most about as we head for these polls to close.
Yeah, that's the only thing left to happen today is people show up and vote. And if it's a heavy turnout, makes it a contest potentially. If it's a low turnout, then maybe a strong organization and a long track record like Donald Trump has, winning here in 16. Pays a dividend. Right now, anecdotally, I'm hearing strong turnout, but that is the mother's milk of politics. Anecdotals.
Okay, and disappointment.
And disappointment sometimes.
Potentially.
Well, we're going to have to wait a while, Jeannie, to see the final figures. And just like we had to wait until the next day to understand that Iowa turnout was actually really low. The weather was a factor there, though, but enthusiasm needs to play in, too, even if the weather is better here. So how are you thinking about it as we wait for these actual figures to come?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to feel, and I hope that this is true, like there is a real race here. I mean, we're hearing, like Rick said, that turnout is higher, at least than I expected. And, the Secretary of State was saying this big, what I thought was a big number of 322. AFP was saying 340. And with the enthusiasm, I thought, can they get there? But some people are saying that maybe they'll get there. And of course, it's going to depend on who's turning out. If there is a large number of independents, that should work to Nikki Haley's advantage. And we were just looking at some of the reported exit polls, at least at this point, and it looks a little bit closer, 51 to 46 for Trump versus Haley. Again, it's an exit poll. We have to, tread lightly on that, but that's a lot closer than what we've been hearing from the pre-primary day polls.
Before we got to any exit polling, we were talking about polling from Suffolk University that saw Donald Trump hit 60% here. Nikki Haley at 38. That's the widest spread we've seen in some time in that survey, Rick. Steve Dupree says a 6-point spread could save face for Nikki Haley. You get within 6, you've got a story to tell, and you can move on and maybe increase the donations. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, clearly the Suffolk poll had movement up for Trump. In fact, most of them that we've seen have followed that. And so, he's got momentum coming in here. Not many people have focused on the fact that Nikki's vote has been going up also on those same polls.
That's true.
So just not at the trajectory level that he has. So, I mean, if she is able to score what is a even tangential victory, right? A victory that is beyond expectations. The expectations game, especially to donors, are everything. If she exceeds those, I think money will continue to flow. She's had an incredibly successful quarter. She has big fundraisers scheduled in places like New York and Texas right after New Hampshire. And if she's able to keep that momentum going with money, then she can plow that into South Carolina like she's done with a $4 million buy already. The strength of her fundraising has allowed that. But also to start looking at these open primary states in Super Tuesday that come shortly thereafter and start playing there.
Well, her campaign says since Ron DeSantis dropped out on Sunday, was that Sunday,
yes.
Saturday? All time bleeds together.
2 days.
I have no idea what day it is. I just know that today is primary day. But $1.5 million, Rick, since Ron DeSantis dropped out of the race. Maybe all of the money just funnels toward whatever alternative, no matter who it is. But her campaign also pointed to Super Tuesday, as you mentioned, with all of those open primaries. When we brought it up with Frank Luntz in the earlier edition of Balance of Power, he said if she can't do it in New Hampshire, she's not going to be able to do it anywhere else realistically. Do you not think that's true?
Look, I mean, Frank Luntz has never had to nominate anybody, right? He just tells us how to do it. The bottom line is it's a delegate game, right? Now, let's talk delegates. If this is a close race tonight, even if she loses, she'll get almost half the delegates in New Hampshire, right?
Right.
And at the time of the convention, that's all that matters. No one's going to say, oh, it was a 7-point race or an 8-point race. They're going to say she's got, half the delegates in New Hampshire. And if she can continue to pick that up, whether it's in South Carolina or somewhere else, and find other places strategically to win and stay competitive, the question is, does Donald Trump make a mistake? Does he err in his campaign? Really, for the first time. We've seen already some of the cognitive problems he's had on the stump. Does that mean he pulls back and doesn't do so many events? He's going to be sitting in courtrooms for the next couple of weeks. Does that take away from his campaign? So it's option value. As long as she's picking up delegates, she can progress with the campaign.
We've seen that movie before a couple times, actually. Ted Cruz most recently. Is that the idea here, that you just kind of survive, but right before the gas tank runs empty, you get to the convention, and you may either have a contested convention or be available, I think you're saying, Rick, if the front runner somehow becomes incapacitated, whether it's legally or otherwise?
Yeah, that is one way. It's not the greatest way to run a campaign,
That's a heck
but
of a
let
strategy.
me throw some cold water on all of this.
Okay.
Let's look at the demographics of South Carolina. They look very much like Iowa. The evangelical vote, it is a much older place, far fewer moderates. You can go down the list. So if she can do it anywhere, it's going to be New Hampshire. And here's the rub. South Carolina, the demographics don't work for her, and it's her home state. So the embarrassment if she isn't able to succeed in the South Carolina. So this is by no means wrapped up. And I keep saying a win here is not a real win, because Donald Trump is not going to accept that she was chosen by Republicans. He is going to say she was chosen by the independents, Democrats, globalists,
Laying
the
the
media.
groundwork already for
and
that.
yeah, and she is the Chris Christie, the never Trumper incarnate. So it is a path. There's a path forward. It is a difficult path forward for Nikki Haley.
Well, I'm glad you brought up South Carolina, because it's not just a factor in the Republican primary. It is also where President Biden and the DNC, by extension, have decided the primary season really begins for the Democrats. He's not on the ballot here in New Hampshire. Others, like Congressman Dean Phillips or Marianne Williamson, are. Could the upset tonight actually be in what the incumbent president, is able to put up here in New Hampshire, knowing, yes, it's just a write-in campaign, so we probably have to view it through a different lens, but does he have the potential to be embarrassed tonight, frankly?
He does. I mean, if he was able to, if he got under, say, I think a 70%, 60%, that would be a problem for the president. Now, long term, it's not a delegate problem. There's no delegates at stake. But to your point, the optics of that look really bad, and the question is going to be asked, why are you not here running? And Bernie Sanders said, rightly so, you have to be making your case to the American public. This Rose Garden strategy, it's not going to work. And they were out today, we should say, celebrating the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Very, very important.
The 51st.
The 51st, but they weren't in New Hampshire. And that, I think, is something that New Hampshireites are not going to forget.
Rick, what are the campaigns doing right now? You're hearing about turnout and exit polling. Obviously, they have their antennas up. What's happening inside the organization in the hours before the polls close?
Yeah, the mechanics of a campaign. They've been out with their poll watchers all day long in every precinct in the state. They have their own lists of identified supporters, opponents, undecideds. They're checking those off as they come in. They stand right next to the table when people check in to get their ballot. They know what independents are taking the Republican ballot. Check that off their list. The amount of data is amazing that you can have at your fingertips. Points. They're filing all those hourly into the headquarters, and then the headquarters is dispatching telephones and door knockers to the houses of people who hadn't shown up yet and saying, okay, this is your second call today, get out and vote. This is your fifth call today, get out and vote. And so there's a real interaction that's done both on the ground, through the telephone, through social media, with campaigns to cajole and to support people turning out to vote. So the mechanics of it are there, and it's happening underneath the radar today, and it's a massive ground game on both sides.
Well, there's only an hour or two, depending on your polling location. Right. To get out there and vote. Indeed, we are almost in the home stretch. Rick and Jeannie are going to be with us as we get closer and closer. Our political panel will join us next with final thoughts. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
There is no digital without chips. And I emphasize that because everybody speaks about the digitalization of the world. And I would even go a step further. There is no Green Deal without chips. So yes, it's a bit like the new oil for the world. And given some of these geopolitical tensions, especially between the US and China, it's become a necessity, I believe, to be more resilient against these geopolitical tensions. And while finding it out the hard way through the past 2 years during the pandemic, and what I mean with the hard way is that we've all seen how key industries in Europe and the US, especially in the industrial, medical, and automotive sectors, have suffered from a shortage of semiconductors.
DOJ or other authorities
Could face bigger challenges next.
It was going to keep Rain World Cup. This is a 3.
As the economic picture.
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
This is Bloomberg.
The New Hampshire primary. It's so quiet this time. Can you liven this up a little bit? Look at her. That's got to be clear. That's a toothbrush. Vermin Supreme, ladies and gentlemen. Rick and Jeannie are back with us for some final thoughts. If you don't know Vermin, he's a perennial candidate here, kind of what they call the crazy candidates in New Hampshire. I've been talking about the carnival atmosphere. That was a little bit more like it, Rick Davis. You actually brought Vermin Supreme on stage once with John McCain.
Once, probably a dozen times over the 20 years that John was active.
Where is he from? What's the deal there?
He's from here, and he's got a platform of dental hygiene and whatever else is going on. And he's just one of those great institutions of New Hampshire politics. And some politicians are really put off by him, but John was really entertained by him and would give him the microphone in a couple of minutes to make sure people are brushing their teeth.
Well, that's right. Everyone gets a pony, he says, if he gets elected, Kaylee.
I can't speak right now.
He's wearing a boot on his head.
Do you have a thought on Mr. Supreme?
I'm glad Joe did that. I'm glad you stayed away, Kaylee. That was a smart move.
Yeah. I saw him fall down at one point earlier. The boot never came off the head. He's a force of nature. Yeah, well, it really has been.
Have a chin strap, or it's just
They actually
nice
went for the Libertarian nomination at one point. This is real politics, which brings us to our program coming up. 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll all be here. Special coverage on Bloomberg TV and radio.
They're brimming with sensors. There's several cameras that look out at your world because we're mapping your physical world so we could put the content in there. There's several cameras looking at your eyes so we know where you're looking in your physical world. And that's a lot of data. That's a lot of very personal data. There's a number of other sensors on the device that are needed to make it work in the way it does. So we feel strongly that, first of all, people should know what these devices devices can do. And since we're at the beginning of the curve, let's work on the right guidelines and put those guardrails in place now versus letting it out of the bag and trying to rein it in, several years from now.
So what rules would you put in place, and who should make up and enforce the rules?
I think it's definitely a public-private discussion, but it's a very complex technology. So I actually spend quite a bit of time in DC talking to folks, saying, just educating them on what it could do. But I think first and foremost, the data that it collects, there needs to be